across Iran. And these protests were sparked Thursday, and they've only continued to grow in size. Massive demonstrations against the Islamist regime as a whole. They're chanting, "We do not want an Islamic republic. We do not want an oppressive regime. We do not want mercenary police." There have been reports that protesters have been shot at, several of them killed, but they want the Ayatollah out. But to hear the mainstream media talk about these Iranian protests, you would think that it's just over economic unrest, just your typical labor protest, something we see in Iran. But these are massive demonstrations. They haven't had this many people taken to the streets since 2009, when the people were protesting what they thought was a rigged election. So what we're seeing is CNN's headline, "Iranians hold pro-government rallies." After 2 days of rare anti-government protests, a witness said government supporters rallied in Tehran. So they're not talking to you about the massive numbers of people who are protesting against the government, but they'll tell you about this one little group that a witness said took place where they were pro their oppressive Iranian regime. Why? What in the world is this reporting style? Well, the Washington Post, there was absolutely nothing about the Iranian protests on their front page. CNN was actually called out by Ted Cruz, who said, look, when you guys are being accused of being fake news propaganda, maybe try not to write stories that read like Iranian Pravda. Now, of course, we've got an opinion article up by Stephen L. Miller over at Fox News, who's saying, why are the mainstream media outlets so hesitant to report on Iran's protests? And he points out how the New York Times and others, the Washington Post, they talked about these protests and described them simply as economic grievances, which is the same way Iranian state-run television described them as well. So a lot of people are wondering what's up with the mainstream media coverage of these protests. Are they for an authoritarian police state, Islamo-fascist dictatorship that subjugates women and tortures and kills its dissidents and issues the death penalty for crimes like homosexuality? It seems like this is something they could get behind, but for whatever reason, they are not. Is it because women in Iran are defying the Islamic religious dress code that was implemented in 1979 that said women had to wear their hijab or they would face arrest? Here we have one woman standing up, defying that law, that dress code, and she doesn't have her head covering. She doesn't have her male handler out there with her. She's standing up alone, quickly becoming an icon of that protest. You can compare her to the original women's marchers in Iran in 1979, who came out to show that they were also against this Islamic dress code as well when it was originally imposed after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Are these Western media outlets silent because they promoted the women's march and the hijab as a symbol of empowerment? Like, it's so empowering. We remember people were crying. We even have a man wearing a hijab. Oh my God, he's so empowered. People were really upset about this. They said, you know what, women in oppressive countries don't have a choice when it comes to wearing the hijab, so it's kind of ridiculous that you would use this as a symbol of female empowerment. Is that why the media isn't really covering that angle of the protests? Or is the media failing to cover these Iranian protests in order to protect the legacy of the Obama-Iran nuclear deal? Let's not forget the establishment media were the main cheerleaders pumping out propaganda about this deal. Anyone who even asked questions about it or criticized it at all was immediately attacked. Let's not forget this deal that was so good, Obama had to send a plane with $400 million in cash to Iran the day that they made this deal official, and it was also a ransom payment that Iran agreed to release some of our prisoners.
Okay, that's a report from Leanne McAdoo. You can find the full report on the Alex Jones YouTube channel. Right there it is. The silence from the liberal media on the Iranian protest, the silence from Linda Sarsour, the silence from the Women's March on the Iranian protest is deafening. We've got stacks and stacks of news on the other side. Roger Stone joins us. Don't go anywhere. This is The War Room.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and you're in The War Room. This is part of the expanded coverage that Alex Jones has mapped out for the burgeoning INFOWARS Information Command Center. We have now opened our bureau in Miami. We've opened our bureau in New York. We've opened our bureau in D.C. and we are bringing you more of the incisive, investigative journalism, exposing the excesses and crimes of the globalist left and those who would betray the American dream. They had the presidential election of 2016 completely wired, you see. Hillary Clinton was going to be president, and Jeb Bush's job for his cut was to be a graceful loser. And if Hillary was so inept that Jeb managed to win, it didn't really matter because all the same people would have jobs, and the Bushes will merely cut the Clintons in the way the Clintons have always cut the Bushes in for a piece of their massive theft. They are both crony capitalists. Don't kid yourself. The Clintons are not liberals or progressives. They believe in nothing but the money. The Bushes are not conservatives or libertarians or liberty-oriented. They believe in anything they need to. George H.W. Bush can run as an abortion proponent and then later say he was always pro-life. He can support the entire agenda of the John Birch Society while running for the Senate in 1964, and he can disavow every piece of it running for Congress in 1966. So we have, I think, now turned the corner in terms of their domination of our politics. But Donald Trump is a threat to them that they cannot get over. And the handling of this Iranian matter is a perfect example. We now know that the advisors to Barack Obama have been criticizing Donald Trump for supporting the uprising by women across the Middle East and in Iran. See, those days are over when you look the other way at the excesses of this crazy ideology that crushes women and gays and Christians or anyone who refuses to see things the way they see them. Donald Trump's posting of a link that showed ISIS slaughtering a handicapped Dutch man is now the formal policy of the United States. We call Islamic terrorism what it is. Let's be clear. None of us here at INFOWARS are for excessive foreign expansionism. We don't want more foreign wars that cost billions, in which the elites profiteer, but our inherent national interest is just nowhere to be found. We, at the same time, recognize that because of the conduct of foreign policy by the Bushes and the Clintons, in which they changed sides so frequently and armed both our friends and our foes, leaves Donald Trump with ISIS, a loose end that unfortunately he has no choice as a realist but to clean up. My fear, as I expressed yesterday on the War Room, is that the generals around him, Kelly, whose own politics are progressive left, Mattis, who admitted before the election that he voted for Hillary and specifically denounced Trump, and of course H.R. McMaster, who has proved his disloyalty, pardon me, in the incident with Sophia Katz, the CEO of Oracle. It was INFOWARS that first reported that the National Security Advisor to the president sat in a dinner with this eminent businesswoman who is widely respected, and after too many belts, was bad-mouthing the president of the United States. We reported specifically that McMaster took a cell phone call from the president, stepped away from the table, as would be appropriate, and came back to the table to comment that the president was an idiot. He later called him a moron. He said his ability to understand anything beyond 140 characters is non-existent. He's a child. I, H.R. McMaster, must save the world from nuclear destruction. Katz was so appalled by this boast and this treachery that she informed her close friend, Sheldon Adelson, the philanthropist and gaming magnate from Nevada. And only months later, the mainstream media confirmed the existence of this dinner and the precise conversation that we here at InfoWars predicted. I have been extraordinarily impressed looking at the new front line of products that have come up at the InfoWars store. I have myself long been an aficionado of both Eastern medicine, herbology, acupuncture, Tai Chi, Qigong, a little more exotic form of martial arts. And I recognize that Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine, has only existed for several centuries longer than the take a pill mentality of big pharma and many, not all, but many AMA trained doctors today. Sadly, there are still millions in the medical establishment who eschew what is very clearly therapy and benefits from natural herbs and natural supplements, all of which, of course, are legal. There are benefits in acupuncture. There are benefits in nutritional products, particularly if one is trying to gain weight and is training hard. And Alex Jones really does an amazing job of fusing the best with some of the oldest and ancient but effective blends, the new Alpha Power blend. Look, I've taken a lot of energy tonics. That's what this is called in Chinese medicine. It's heat-based, as they say. This just blows me away in terms of my energy level. I get a better run in the morning. I can work later at night. It is really changed my work habits. And right now you can get it at $34.95, which is a 50% cut. I am now going to look at carnivore, which is a digestive enzyme formula. It's now 33% off. This one is important because while I respect those who eschew red meat and who prefer to take their protein as chicken or fish or turkey, and I really cannot get down with the vegans and the vegetarians out there because I think it takes protein to build muscle. At the same time, some red meat in your diet, particularly if you're trying to stay in shape and you're exercising regularly, I think is required. Carnivore is similar to a product that I've taken before, although my son has taken it and he says it's much better. I've just ordered it. It helps you digest in your gut and break down the enzymes commonly found in red meat. And it really is enticing. I've got it. I'm going to try it. My son is yet another satisfied customer. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and you're in the War Room with your host, Roger Stone, broadcasting now from an undisclosed location in sunny South Florida, and my colleague, Owen Schroyer, in our state-of-the-art and ever-expanding InfoWars studio in Austin. When you visit Austin, I must tell you, it's exhilarating because there's a great spirit on the InfoWars staff, not only the on-air talent, but all of the great writers and technicians and IT people. And there's always kind of a small coterie of activists hanging around. And the energy is really significant. It is we realize the forces of freedom are on the move. We realize that InfoWars is a key asset in the fight for truth. And the shot of our taking back our country it is only possible because of a free alternative media in which INFOWARS is one, if not the leader. This is why Google seeks to snuff us. This is why Twitter seeks to silence us. This is why they want to put the toothpaste back in the tube. This is why they're using the laws set by the Congress to guarantee no pornography and decency on the needy are being used to suppress political speech. This is why it's important, as I say, that you hit the INFOWARS store, because we are the spirit of the revolution, and Trump can only be protected and the revolution continued if we are out there to defend him and expose the hypocrisy of the jackals at the hyenas who are nipping at the heels of a giant. I do want to say that I saw over the holiday break an extraordinary new book by the reporter Edward Klein entitled All Out War, which is his outline of the extraordinary effort to take down the president. Now, Ed Klein is not somebody whose writing should be taken lightly. He has gone from being a copy boy for the New York Daily News, becoming a reporter for the World Telegram and Sun. He's a Columbia graduate, but more importantly, he worked with distinguished service as a managing editor for Newsweek, also joined the New York Times, editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, then led this flagship publication for a number of years, then at Time Magazine, winning a Pulitzer Prize. Ed Klein has written for Vanity Fair and so on, an extraordinary author, but his books specifically on the Obamas, on the Clintons, is some of the very best, completely unbiased investigative journalism out there today. And his new book, All Out War, is about the attempt to take Donald Trump down. And leafing through this terrific book, which I commend to you, I found this passage which confirms, based on Ed Klein's research, that the Justice Department under Barack Obama went into the FISA court, were extraordinarily confident that they could trick a judge into allowing them to spy on 4 individuals. Those being General Flynn, Paul Manafort, the harmless, but I think decent Carter Page, and myself. And they were stunned when the FISA court judge declined their authority to push such a surveillance. Later in Klein's incredible book, he tells about how they take the exact same request, including yours truly, and they resubmit it to a judge and trick that judge into approval. Thus begins the surveillance of the Trump campaign by the deep state. This information is, of course, then used in the unmaskings. In some ways, I must say, I feel like the Forrest Gump of American politics, whether it was the Bush-Gore recount, or whether it was the Trump campaign, or even as a wrongly accused witness in the farce that is the Russian collusion delusion. I have enjoyed a role in every major presidential campaign, albeit one. I was not involved in George Bush's re-election campaign. And I specifically told Lee Atwater, a colleague of some time, about the folly of the Willie Horton ad. I was a critic of that ad. It wasn't that I thought it might not work. I knew it probably would, but it would be a stain that the Bushes would wear forever. And so, sadly, did my friend Lee Atwater. I have memorialized this in several articles in my books. That I had no role in the campaign of 1992. So in this particular case, I have found few reporters who have the sources of an Ed Klein. I really strongly recommend Klein's book to you if you want to see the precursor to what I believe is the A, B, and C plan. As I reported yesterday on the War Room, the fact that Rex Tillerson is now staying after a private lunch with the president, including General McMaster, General Mattis, and General Kelly, that is because, in my opinion, they need Tillerson's vote for the coming 11th Amendment takedown, 25th Amendment takedown, pardon me. We will talk about this on the other side. You're on the War Room with Roger Stone, and we're going to bring back my colleague Owen Schroyer and kick it around. We'll be right back. And there it is.
All right. Well, actually, we've got about 60 seconds left in this segment here, Roger. So I know that we're going to get into the Tillerson updates and everything else. But
I apologize. I lost my clock there for a second.
It's interesting, though, because yesterday, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, too, sometime before we get off here. Yesterday, President Trump tweets out top Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin, guilty of X and X. The same man that was found guilty of that wound up in jail. Doesn't she belong in jail? And then here we are 24 hours later, and there is a fire at Bill and Hillary Clinton's house. I mean, it's not like Hillary Clinton has a history of deleting emails or, you know, the Democrats smashing servers or not turning over servers. So I'm sure there's nothing to this story. You know, Hillary and Bill Clinton have never done anything they want to try to hide, so I'm sure that there's just nothing to this. It was just a house fire at Bill and Hillary's house, and they're not trying to hide any evidence of any wrongdoing that they've ever done. No way.
All right, you're back in the War Room with your correspondents, Roger Stone, and in the Austin Power Center, Owen Schroyer. I'm glad you raised the issue of Huma Abedin and her emails. Let me try to break down for our audience what has really transpired here. The emails that were released by the State Department, which were emails that Huma Abedin forwarded to a server that was under the control of both she and her husband, the currently incarcerated Congressman Anthony Weiner, were but a small portion of the entire trove of emails. Interestingly enough, what the State Department released was evidence that Huma regularly forwarded classified documents illegally to a server she shared with her husband. In other words, this data dump was tailored as the evidence for the conviction of a crime, a specific crime, the misuse of classified documents, what Hillary should be charged with. Now, why would the State Department do this? Well, to be seen in the larger light of the executive order put out last week, giving the president broad powers to go after those who have been involved in public corruption or pedophilia or corporate theft or any other crime against the country, this is a chilling indictment that the perp walk is coming for Huma. Now, how do I know that this is just a portion? We reported here at INFOWARS during the final days of the election that the trove of emails in question was discovered not by the FBI, but by the New York Police Department. And that the police department had forwarded these emails discovered in their conduct of a underage texting scandal involving Weiner, who would ultimately, of course, be charged, convicted, and sent to prison. and that the documents were supplied by NYPD to the FBI. My sources tell me that there's far, far more here than the classified State Department documents. There's money laundering, there's corruption, there's pedophilia, there's child exploitation. There's a great deal of material regarding Haiti and the theft of the Haitian earthquake funds. One detective told me point blank, "This is Huma's blackmail file." And I said, "You mean she might blackmail Hillary and Bill?" He said, "No, but if they ever choose to try to dump her, this is how she will stay on the payroll. She will stay in the first circle." Extraordinary, Owen, really extraordinary.
Well, and last night you had this report coming from John Solomon at The Hill, who's been doing great work, especially when it comes to the Uranium One scandal and what was really a lack of a fair investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. John Solomon writes this for The Hill last night. It gets published. Congressional investigators find irregularities in FBI's handling of Clinton email case. Now, of course, yesterday morning, President Trump sends the tweet out, as you're referring to, Huma Abedin, with what was found in her emails and the classified information that also made its way to Pervert Wiener's servers as well, and how in other similar instances, the perpetrator has been put in jail. That in this case would be Huma Abedin. And then today, you have a fire at Bill and Hillary's Chappaqua, New York compound. So I mean, are we reaching here? Or is there a connection between all of these events, Roger?
Well, there's an intermediate step that's very important here, and you can read about it in Hillary's fictional book, What Happened? What happened? Let me tell you what happened. People figured out that you were a mean-spirited, vile, privileged, nasty, short-tempered, foul-mouthed, an epically greedy autocrat. And they saw through your lifetime of crime and corruption, and they turned to a true American patriot. But she tells us in her book, all about what has transpired. Remember, whatever is in the NYPD discovered emails is so shocking to Mr. Comey that he announces on the Friday before the election that he's reopening the investigation into her email case. Then he wants us to believe by Sunday evening that a bureau that took 3 years to read 330,000 documents read 750,000 documents in 2 days, using presumably very broad keyword search engines. Bogus, in my view. The people I saw and spoke with at NYPD as INFOWARS sources had seen the actual emails, and they described them as lewd, nasty, stunning, brazen, and so on. So we know that they had to cover this up. Then Comey has us believe that there's nothing there of value. Now they release a small number. If this is what Comey saw, he would not have reopened the investigation. This is a treasure trove that would pave the way to prison for both Clintons if they have not already done so, Owen.
And just to put things in perspective here for the, let's just say, the Trump detractors, if Donald Trump refused to turn over information in the Russian investigation probe, as the DNC did, the DNC and CrowdStrike are yet to turn over their servers so that they can show who indeed hacked them, whether or not it was the Russians. And then two, if you look at all of the emails and the deleting of the emails and everything that took place within the Clinton campaign, that for sure would be considered obstruction of justice if it was Donald Trump doing it. However, he's not the one that did it. He's not the one that deleted the emails. He's not the one that's not cooperating with any investigation and making false claims, yet he is still the target of this investigation.
Which is why when you say, what about the fire, one has to say, absolutely. If there were a fire at a Trump golf course, they'd say he was destroying evidence of Russian collusion. The Clintons would steal a hot stove. How do we know that they would destroy evidence? They have already done so in a crime spree that goes back almost 40 years. So, yes, a fire in their home in posh Tony Chappaqua has to be viewed very suspiciously. Now, is it possible that Bill was in a bedroom smoking pot with one of the maids? Entirely possible.
It could have been a cigar, all right? It could have been a cigar.
But as he told a famous reporter, cocaine, what does that look like? Which is funny because Roger Clinton, quoted in my book, the Clintons warned women saying that his brother snorted cocaine like a vacuum cleaner.
I've never heard of cocaine. It's not like people that do a bunch of cocaine's voice ends up sounding like this. That never happens ever, so I don't know what you're talking about. That was just a small fire we had today. It was an oven we were trying to steal from the White House. It was still on. We didn't know it was on, though, Roger.
Well, I would say this. You're no Randy Credico, but not bad. The great Owen Schroyer, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll take it. Thank you, Roger.
Welcome back. You are in the right place. This is Freedom Command Central. It's the War Room with Roger Stone and Owen Schroyer, part of the expanded coverage that Alex Jones has mapped out for 2018. I know, Owen, that you, like me, are very proud of the fact that we here at InfoWars break a lot of news. We have been consistently ahead of the mainstream media. Two stories that illustrate that extremely well is the news yesterday that veteran conservative Senator Orrin Hatch would step down in Utah, and former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, the failed 26 Republican presidential candidate, would launch candidacy for that seat. The New York Times and the Washington Post reported this as if it was a breathtaking revelation when we had reported Romney's preparation. And in fact, at this moment, he appears to be unchallenged in a Republican primary for that seat. Matt Drudge put it up, only reporting the news as it is. So once again, InfoWars gave you the straight story weeks earlier than the mainstream media. Also interesting was a story in The Hill regarding, the reversal of the president's position on troops to Afghanistan. We at InfoWars reported exclusively to you only weeks ago that National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster was attempting to get the president to sign documents authorizing a 50,000 troop allotment to Afghanistan. Remember, we were told we were going to have a continuing presence and that General Mattis would have discretion on the number of troops, but it was implied that it would be around 9,000. 50,000 is the largest single deployment we have had to this doomed enterprise. Candidate Donald Trump knew and said that Afghanistan was a loser, a pit for American lives and money, but success there was unachievable, as the Russians and the Brits both learned. Ronald Reagan skillfully maneuvered the Russians into backing their paw into this mess, and it helped cost them the Cold War. Then we, skillfully as Americans, turned around and stepped in the very trap that we had laid for the Russians. Thank you, George Bush and your successors. So this reversal, again, first reported in InfoWars, but confirming the largest troop allotments yet, and a ramping up, not a phasing down of our military presence. Once again, at InfoWars, tomorrow's news today.
Well, you've done a good job keeping track of all those stories too, Roger, that we break and then we almost forget that we broke it, a month ago or months ago. And then when the mainstream media picks up on it, we kind of realize, oh yeah, we were talking about that a few months back. And this whole Russian collusion stuff is kind of a perfect overall example where as soon as we saw this narrative coming down the pipeline, Roger, we already knew where it came from. We knew where to identify the Russian dossier, Trump dossier. We knew how to identify that. That's clearly a dirty Democrat technique. That's clearly a Clinton fingerprint written all over it. We saw the tea leaves from the beginning. That's why, really? Oh, and I'm not insulting John Solomon. The guy does great work. It's just when we see this headline, congressional investigators find irregularities in FBI's handling of Clinton email case, it's like, well, duh. Duh, really? We've been telling you that since day one. How about Peter Strzok, the same guy that let Hillary Clinton and Cheryl Mills go, is saying he wants an insurance plan for the president?
Well, let me say this. I think John Solomon is literally one of the very best incisive and aggressive investigative journalists out there. It was John Solomon, who then was at Circa News, who broke the extraordinary case that the that the Obama NSA had illegally surveilled almost 39,000 Americans, essentially for political purposes in an act of political espionage paid for by the taxpayers. That relates to the FISA warrant we talked about in the last segment, the fact that I was among those that were being surveilled. So Solomon has broken some huge stories. He and Sarah Carter are among the two investigative journalists that I respect the most. In this story, I think what Solomon has done is to nail down what we first reported on, but in which he has filled in many blanks and provided a great deal of documentation we did not have at the time. So thank God for The Hill. It is neither a conservative or liberal news site. They seem to me to be fact-based, Owen.
Yeah, everything that John Solomon has been reporting on ends up coming true. Same with Sarah Carter. Again, they were both at Circa News. John Solomon now with The Hill. Another reporter that's been doing great work, Chuck Ross for the Daily Caller, he puts out this piece today. Senate panel hits back at Fusion GPS over op-ed claims. Spokesman for Chuck Grassley says that Fusion GPS asked during August 22nd, I guess it was a hearing, for that transcript to be kept confidential, and then Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS declined an invitation for an open hearing. So this is Fusion GPS now, Roger, that is realizing that the heat is on them, and they're trying to avoid any toxicity of this whole thing as well.
Well, it is extraordinary. The worm is turning. We also have stunning news of my old partner and boyhood friend Paul Manafort's lawsuit against the bogus conduct of an investigation by Robert Mueller and the FBI, in this case, DOJ. Manafort and his lawyers have been keeping thread, as they say, for many, many months. Manafort's civil liberties have been systematically violated. His due process has been violated. The thug tactics of Mueller's bully boy hit squad have violated his constitutional rights. And I always believed there was a lawsuit or series of devastating lawsuits coming. Manafort is a feisty Italian American, and he said from the beginning he would not plead guilty to things that he had not done. He refused the entreaties of the special counsel to simply roll on Donald Trump. We'll make all your tax problems, all your money laundering problems, if they're real, go away. Just give us the president. Just tell us that you colluded with the Russians and Trump knew everything. Manafort has refused to do this because to do so, he would have to lie. He would have to perjure himself. And now Manafort strikes back in a devastating lawsuit that cuts to the heart of the abuse of power by Mueller and the Justice Department in this incredible witch hunt.
And this is obviously going to be a story we're going to keep tabs on. And as I didn't even make this connection until just now, hearing you talk about this. I'm wondering if there's any connection here with this lawsuit to the timing of this excoriation of Steve Bannon today. It was Steve Bannon essentially in these alleged direct quotes in the book that came out saying Manafort was laundering money to Russia through an intermediary, Jared Kushner, and that gets published apparently straight out of the mouth of Steve Bannon. He's yet to say that that quote isn't real. Breitbart actually ended up publishing that quote as if it were real. So who knows the story there? But I'm just curious now. I'm wondering if the timing of this is somewhat orchestrated, because it's an awfully great coincidence that the same day Manafort is suing back against the Mueller probe for entrapment, you've got Bannon saying that Manafort and Kushner are guilty. So that's just a weird another ripple that we have in this deal.
Indeed. Look, I'm not going to criticize Steve Bannon because I don't think infighting in the movement's a good idea. I agree with Steve on many things. I disagree with him on others. He was, he was addressed in the worst dressed list in a jovial manner. And I must say this, Michael Wolff, the author of this book, has a notorious reputation for falsification of words, lying, and making things up. So I'm going to give Bannon the benefit of the doubt. I do know this. Paul Manafort was not laundering money through Jared Kushner to Russia. It doesn't even make sense.
All right, there goes Roger Stone. This is The War Room. We'll be right back.